This is Rise. Let's lock in with the goal of changing one life at a time. Yours. Together, let us rise up, inspire, strengthen, and elevate our minds. It's time to Rise on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, my name is Dr. Saran Heron, and welcome to Rise. Today we're going to talk about being smart with your money. My guest today is Jared Dillian, who's the editor of the Daily Dirtnap, a daily market newsletter for investment professionals. Continuously published since 2008, Jared is the founder of Jared Dillian Money and has previously contributed to Bloomberg's Opinion, Forbes, and TheStreet.com. From 2019 to 2021, he was the host of the Jared Dillian Show, a national syndicated radio show on personal finance, and is now the host of Be Smart podcast. In his spare time, Jared is a progressive house DJ and speaks frequently on mental health issues at financial institutions. He is also the author of Street Freak Money and Madness at Lehman Brothers, which was named Business Week's #1 general business book of 2011, the novel All the Evil of the World, published in 2016, and Those Bastards, 69 Essays, which published in 2023. He is here today to talk about the keys to being smart with your money, tips on ways to use your credit cards, and help you rise above financial stress. Jared, welcome to Rise here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about your background. So you are a finance expert. What made you decide to pick such a degree?
I used to be in the Coast Guard. I was stationed aboard a cutter in Washington State, and we would go on patrols for about 6 or 8 weeks, and we were in San Diego, and one of the other officers on the ship came back with a newspaper, and he was reading the newspaper, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm checking my mutual funds." And I said to him, like, "What's a mutual fund?" Right. And he kind of explained it to me. It's kind of like a basket of stocks that, usually does better than money in a bank account. Like at the time, if you had money in the bank, it was earning about 5% interest. And he said he was making about 15 or 20% on his mutual funds. And I said, gosh, that sounds pretty interesting. So I started doing a lot of research. I went to the local bookstore in town. I bought as many books on finance as I could possibly get. And then I applied to the MBA program at the University of San Francisco, got my MBA, spent a couple years on the trading floor in San Francisco on the options exchange. And then I went to Lehman Brothers, where I was there for 7 years, and I ran the ETF trading desk.
Wow, amazing. Now, you're also an editor. Talk to me about your role as an editor.
Well, I mean, editor doesn't really describe what I do. So I publish a financial newsletter. It's called the Daily Dirtnap. Okay. And it comes out every day. And basically, I'm a one-man band. I write it, I publish it, I edit it. Editor is really just a title. Right. I'm really, I'm the writer of the Daily Dirtnap. Right. That doesn't sound as good as editor. I've written a bunch of books. My editing skills are actually not that great, so it's kind of a strange title. So,
okay, so you're doing it yourself, which you're still doing it. Now, you mentioned that you were a Coast Guard prior. For our college students that may be interested, any tips for them? Like, what was some of your roles that you did as a Coast Guard?
So I was really focused in the Coast Guard. I was focused on law enforcement and intelligence. When I was on the ship, I was a boarding officer. So, the Coast Guard has legal authority to board U.S. vessels and foreign flag vessels in U.S. waters. So I was, being in Washington State, we were really focused on fisheries. I did fisheries most of the time. So I had to get acquainted with fisheries regulations and laws and stuff like that. And then after that tour, I went to the intelligence division of Pacific area in California. And I was focusing on fisheries really from an international standpoint. So, U.S. exclusive economic zone, high seas drift net fishing, the maritime boundary line, stuff like that. So I was, I had a security clearance, and I was doing intelligence analysis. So
Interesting. Now, you were the head of ETF trading desk. Share with us, what did that job entail, as we are talking about finance, and we're going to get into talking about how to be smart with your money in a second.
An ETF is an exchange traded fund. Okay. And it's basically a fund that passively invests in a basket of stocks, and the fund itself is listed and traded on the exchange. So ETFs have been around since 1996. I was running the trading desk from 2004 to 2008. Basically, what we were doing was we were facilitating customer orders in ETFs. So if a hedge fund or a mutual fund or a pension fund wanted to buy 500,000 shares of an ETF, I would sell it to them, and I would hedge with the underlying basket or some other way to hedge. But basically, I was making markets and providing liquidity in ETFs.
Interesting. Now, we're going to get into the topic of being smart with your money. Talk to us, as I'm sure we're all looking for ways to be smart with our money.
Well, the book that I wrote most recently,
Right.
No Worries, How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life, really gets into that. So one of the big takeaways from the book is that it's not a million small things that determine whether you have money. It's a few big things, right? So we have a personal finance industry in this country where there are some well-known people who talk about personal finance, and they generally say the same thing. They say you should eat mac and cheese and never buy coffee and save your pennies and stuff like that. If you do the math on this, it really doesn't make sense. What you're doing is you're denying yourself small luxuries in a program for saving that is really unsustainable, and you can have a much greater impact by focusing on the big decisions. And there's really three big decisions. There's buying a house, buying a car, and going to college, getting student loans. And if you get those three things right, you really don't have to worry about this daily austerity of not buying coffee at Starbucks.
Interesting. Now, debt and risk. Explain that concept for our listeners who are very much interested in what we're talking about, because they're definitely looking for information, again, to be smart with their money. What do you mean by debt and risk? And explain that concept for us.
Well, the two sources of financial stress, and there are only two sources of financial stress, are debt and risk, right? So if you have a lot of debt, it's going to cause you a lot of stress. If you have a lot of risk in the financial markets, it's going to cause a lot of stress. So the goal is to try to eliminate debt and risk to the extent that you can possible, so you don't have to worry about money. And sometimes people say, well, gee, isn't not having enough money a source of financial stress?
Right.
And frequently it isn't. Actually, that's not true. Like, I know lots of people who are of very modest means who don't have any stress at all because they don't have debt and they don't have risk. Right. On the other hand, you have very wealthy people, you have billionaires who have huge amounts of debt and huge amounts of risk, and they experience a lot of financial stress. So it's not really a function of how much money you have. It's a function of how you structure your financial life.
I think that's an important part. How do you structure your financial life? I think we have to make smart decisions early. Now, you use a rubric. Share with our listeners, what's that rubric? What is that rubric about?
Well, what I was talking about with that is going to college. Okay, so college is more expensive than ever. It continues to get more expensive.
Definitely.
It's very hard to go to college without taking out a lot of debt. So you have to sort of do some thinking about, when you get a degree, what that degree is worth and how much did you spend to get it and how much debt did you take out. So what I said in the book was, if you get into a tier one school, like an Ivy League school or an MIT or a Caltech or Chicago or something like that, if you get into a top tier school, you should really go. It doesn't matter what it costs, right? Because the name brand of the school and the education that you get are going to ensure that you get a high paying job.
Right.
If you go to a second tier school, like a state school or something like that, then what I said was, you should take out no more than $40,000 in debt, right? And the reason I said $40,000 is if you can pay off $8,000 a year, you can pay off that debt in 5 years. And the goal should really be to pay off your student debt in 5 years. And if you go to a third tier school, then really you should go to school if you can only have no debt at all. So that's what I meant by the rubric.
Interesting concept. Now, most Americans, even college students, may obtain their first credit card during college. What advice do you have for them in terms of the usage of a credit card?
Well, a credit card is a convenient way to pay for things. It's definitely more convenient than cash. Right. We use credit cards all the time. It's a very bad way to borrow money, right? So using a credit card is very simple. You just make sure you pay off the balance every month. Interest rates on credit cards these days are about 21%. So just for the sake of example, if you had $100,000 in credit card debt, you would be paying $21,000 a year in interest, which is insanity. It's a huge amount of money. So some people have a difficult time paying off the balance every month. And my suggestion is, which I talked about in No Worries, we have these credit card apps on our phone. And at any time during the month, you can push the button for the credit card app and see what the balance is. And if you have a budget of how much to spend during the month, say it's like $2,000, if it's halfway through the month and you've already spent $1,500, then you have to spend less money in the second half of the month. The cool thing about the credit card apps is we can check our balances at any time. When I first started using credit cards, I'm 50 years old. When I first started using credit cards in the 90s, your balance was really a mystery until you got a paper statement in the mail.
Right.
Like you really had no idea how much you owed, and at the
true.
month you would get a surprise.
Yes.
So
a good point in terms of like you got to manage your money and plan. You are listening to Rise on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and today we're talking to Jared Dillian, who is an editor of the Daily Dirtnap, a daily market newsletter for investment professionals, continuously published since 2008. Jared is the founder of Jared Dillian Money and has previously contributed to Bloomberg Opinion, Forbes, and TheStreet.com. From 2019 to 2021, he was the host of the Jared Dillian Show, a national syndicated radio show on personal finance, and is now the host of Be Smart podcast. In his spare time, Jared is a progressive house DJ and speaks frequently on mental health issues at financial institutions. He is also the author of Street Freak, Money and Madness at Lehman Brothers, which was named Business Week #1 General Business Book of 2011, the novel All the Evil of This World, published 2016, and Those Bastards, 69 Essays, which published in 2023, is here to talk about keys to being smart with your money, tips on ways to use credit cards, and helping you rise above financial stress. Now, Jared, as we've been talking about money, now you also teach finance. What are some common mistakes that you would say that those who are not financially literate make?
Well, I teach finance at Coastal Carolina University, and I actually teach personal finance, which I enjoy a lot. I typically have freshmen in my class. So these are kids, they're 18 years old. They really don't know anything about anything. They might be getting a credit card for the first time or something like that. What I found is probably the one thing that they understand the least is actually the thing that's most important, and that's student loans. And what they don't understand about student loans is that student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. So what does that mean? So that means that, let's say you get yourself into trouble with a lot of debt. You have credit card debt and a mortgage and a car loan, and you can't pay your bills. If you declare bankruptcy, all the debt goes away except for the student loans, right? So the only way to get rid of the student loans ever is to pay them down. And that debt follows you around for the rest of your life. So it's really the worst kind of debt. And it's pretty amazing, when I talk to these 18-year-old kids and they've just borrowed a bunch of money to go to college, like they really had no idea that was the case.
Interesting. Those who are listening, what would you say is the first step to being smart with your money for those who are listening and want to be financially free and not stressed? As you mentioned, your book has a lot of tips, but what are the first steps that you think one needs to do in order to be smart with your money?
Well, saving is very important, saving and investing, and the key is to do it early. So you can't really do math on the radio. It's hard to talk about math on the radio,
I'm sure.
but I'll just give you an example.
Right.
So you have two scenarios. Scenario one, you contribute to a 401k from age 22 to 32, and then you never contribute again for the rest of your life. Scenario two is you don't contribute until age 32, and then you contribute for the next 30 years until you're 62. Which of those scenarios do you end up with the most money? And it's actually the first scenario. If you contributed to a 401k for the first 10 years of your career and you never did it again, you would end up with more money than if you contributed for the last 30 years. So saving and investing early is super important. I started investing when I was 23 years old. I started a Roth IRA. I started contributing to it, and it's grown over time. And that compounding over time is what makes it work.
Excellent advice. Now, you have your own podcast. How can our listeners find your podcast? And if you don't mind sharing, I know you talk about finance, but what are some hot topics that you're talking about now on your podcast that our listeners, including college students and our other audience, may be interested in?
So it's called the Be Smart Podcast, which I actually do with somebody else in my company. His name's Cameron, and we have a discussion every week. I actually just recorded it today. Today's Monday. I think he's posting it on Wednesday or something like that, but it gets posted every week. And it's really just a discussion about money. Today we talked about housing. And he asked my opinion on the housing market, whether housing prices would come down at all or whether interest rates would come down. And I said that it's possible that interest rates would come down, but I think it's very unlikely that housing prices come down a lot because we've had a lot of immigration. So we've had a lot of people enter the housing market. So the point is that if you're young and you're thinking about buying a house, affordability is really bad right now. Houses have gotten so much more expensive and interest rates have gone up.
Agreed.
But nonetheless, housing might be more unaffordable 5 or 10 years from now. So it might be good to bite the bullet and do it now.
I agree. Just get it over with. It's not going to get any cheaper. Now, you're also an author. Talk to me. What is your inspiration? I know you recently have different things that you're doing, but what is your inspiration around writing? Why do you write?
Well, I'm really a writer first, and the reason that I write is because if I held all this stuff in, I would just go crazy.
Why not share it, right?
But no, my first book, Street Freak, was a memoir. My second book was a novel. My third book was an essay collection. My fourth book was trade nonfiction. My fifth book, which is coming out in October, is a short story collection. So I've done a memoir, novel, essays, nonfiction, and short stories for my first 5 books, which has never been done before by anybody. I looked it up.
Well, congratulations on that. That's a big accomplishment, being the first. Now, additional to being an author, you also go around and you talk to different corporations about mental health, which is something I want you to talk about that for our listeners, because they may be wondering, what are you talking about? You're doing finance. Why is mental health important for our finance people? So speak to us a little bit about that.
Well, it's a really important issue for me. I have bipolar disorder. I'm actually bipolar 1, and I was diagnosed in 2006, was hospitalized at the time. And, really it's a constant struggle for me to stay sane and sober. My mental health is the most important thing in the world. And I have to tell you that when I was working on Wall Street, there's a lot of stress. People experience a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of depression. It's mostly anxiety and depression that people have trouble with. And once I got better, I said, I'd really like to help people out, especially in the financial world, because these sorts of stresses are very common. So every once in a while, like once a year, I'll go to a bank and I'll speak on mental health issues.
I think that's excellent. I think in many careers, your mental health is something that it gets neglected or overlooked as not being important, not realizing how important it is for each person to come to work and being able to function at the highest capacity if we're talking about these issues. So congratulations on doing that. Now, those individuals who are listening to the program who want that financial freedom, what kind of mindset do you believe one has to have in order to achieve all these excellent points that you've given about saving early, about taking a look at credit card bills? What kind of mindset do you think one needs to have then have that freedom of not worrying later versus being smart with their money earlier?
Well, it's really the difference between having a scarcity mentality and an abundance mentality. And a lot of people think that money is hard to get, but it is actually very easy to get. And a lot of the advice that people get today is, you have somebody, let's say the average salary in this country is $60,000 a year. So you have somebody who makes $60,000 a year and they're on a very tight budget and they kind of think to themselves, well, this is what I make and that's all that I make and that's what I can do. Right. But you kind of have to think outside the box. There are a lot of other ways to make money. You can get a second job. You can work longer hours. You can go back to school and start a career, which makes you more money. You can do passive income. You can be a landlord. You can start a business, which is the number one way to make money. You can do all of these things. So, you don't just make what you make. There's a lot of other ways to make money. And by the way, making more money is a lot more fun than cutting expenses, which is really terrible.
I'd have to agree with you on that. You are listening to Rise on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and today we're talking to Jared Dillian, who's the editor of the Daily Dirtnap, a daily market newsletter for investment professionals. Continuously published since 2008, Jared is the founder of Jared Dillian Money and has previously contributed to Bloomberg Opinion, Forbes, and TheStreet.com from 2019 to 2021. He was the host of the Jared Dillian Show, a nationally syndicated radio show on personal finance, and is now the host of Be Smart podcast. In his spare time, Jared is a progressive house DJ and speaks frequently on mental health issues at financial institutions. He is also an author. He has been named Business Week #1 General Business Book of 2011. He's written a novel. He's also published in 2016, and those bastards 69 essays, which published in 2023. And as he recently mentioned, he's having another book that's going to be published in October. He's here to talk about the keys to being smart with your money, tips on ways to use credit cards, and helping you rise above financial stress. Now, Jared, as we're talking and our college students are listening to the program and others are listening to the program, for our college students, what do you want to say as it pertains to stress for them? As you know, you've been in college, you've done your own studies, and it could become stressful for them at times. What would you want to say to them if you had to say encourage them today?
Well, I don't want to say that I'm not sympathetic, because I'm definitely sympathetic to anybody who's experiencing stress. But, when I went to college, I went to a military academy, so that was huge amounts of stress. So, when I look at my students at Coastal Carolina, I'm like, gosh, that doesn't seem very stressful to me. But they do have stress. They have papers due and exams and stuff like that. Yes. Really, the stress starts when you graduate from college. The stress you experience while you're in college is typically pretty minor. It may not feel pretty minor, but it actually is. And once you get out into the world and you get a job and you start paying bills, and then it gets real in a hurry. So, right. I'm not saying I wish I could go back to my college days. There's a phrase that people use nowadays called adulting. You probably heard that before. Yes. Like, yeah. I'm adulting right now. Like, when you're 22 and you rent an apartment and you get a job, like, you're adulting really fast, and it does get stressful.
Now, Jared, for those who are listening who want to connect with you, how can they connect with you? I know you have your podcast, but if they want to contact you, whether it's for speaking engagement and just get in touch with you to be on their program, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me at jareddillian.com. That's my author website. It has my CV up there, it has my books, and there's a contact page with a form you can fill out. You can get in touch with me. I answer all the emails, and yeah, please do that.
And if there's one more thing, one last advice that you want to leave with our listeners today about being smart with their money, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to take risk. I've taken a bunch of risks in my life. Some of them have been calculated, some of them have been not. But when you take a risk and you bet on yourself and it pays off, there is nothing better than that.
Thank you so much, Jared, for taking the time out. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate you coming on our program today.
Yes, thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Saran Heron. Let us take our finances seriously. As you heard from an expert himself that provided very useful information, it is important to utilize resources that are available to us and decrease our financial stress. We can overcome all things. Make the necessary changes today for a better tomorrow. Blessings to you all. Until next time, thank you for listening to this week's edition of Rise, available wherever you listen to podcasts and always right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn. But not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer.
In response to attacks against Asian Americans, Maddie Park raised over $250,000 to donate cab rides to the Asian community.
There is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.
Support the Asian community. Learn how at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.